Hey everyone, welcome to an episode of InRange. I've got Russell Fagan here, Sinistro Rifleman, and we're going to start doing kind of a thing which I'm calling 101. So we just did a video a little while ago about different mounting options when you were adding a red dot sight in addendum to an LPVO, right?
Yep.
Stacked versus offset or blah, blah, blah. And we just took it for granted that people kind of understood some of the principles and concepts around that in the first place. And the comment section really kind of indicated that wasn't necessarily the case. There's a lot of people that are coming to this topic now that are new or haven't done necessarily this type of shooting at all. And I thought what we probably need to do is revisit something we've talked about on the channel a lot, but not as a singular separate discussion.
Yeah, it's been broken out over a number of different videos over a decade.
Yeah, like if you watch 50 videos in InRange, you're going to get a synopsis of what we're going to talk about now.
Right.
But this is pointed and on purpose. Mm-hmm. So when we were doing the What Would Stoner Do project, which goes now all the way back to 2017, the conclusion in general was that the suggested sighting system for the What Would Stoner Do project was a red dot sight backed up with a magnifier. And the principles behind that, and I'd like you to speak to this as well, was that when you flip the magnifier out of the way, a red dot sight requires no eye relief whatsoever. So what that means to people that don't know what that means, we're going to go with the basics here, right? Mm-hmm. Is that wherever your eye is, if you can see the dot with a relatively high quality red dot sight that doesn't have parallax, if you can see the dot and it's on top of the target you want to shoot at, regardless of if you're holding it upside down or sideways or just barely able to see the dot, you can hit the target.
Correct.
And so that means head placement, unusual, unorthodox positions, speed of acquisition. When the gun comes up, it's just there. You don't need a perfect sight picture. If the dot's there, you can use it. And if you needed magnification, you'd flip the magnifier over and you had kind of the best of both worlds. And so the reason and rationale for that, to summarize, the reason we suggested red dot with magnifier was magnifier for distance and possible target identification, but a red dot sight provides the fastest, easiest, lowest effort, no eye relief issue whatsoever sighting solution. But now we see in a lot of competition, like what you were talking about in this LPVO video, that low power variable optics, which are ones that usually go from like 1 to 9x or 1 to 6x or something like that, have taken up a lot of that space.
Yeah, and it really comes down to use case. So like I kind of break down which optic I'm picking based upon the likely distances I'm going to use it at and the size of the targets to be encountered.
Okay.
And this is competition talk, but you can also apply the same theory to your practical real world situation as well. So like for me, I prefer red dot and magnifier when most of the shooting is going to be at 200 yards or less, with some past 200 and some smaller targets. Like not the majority, something probably around like 25% or less of the targets are going to be small. Most of the match is up close, and particularly if there's awkward positions and props that I'm going to have to work with, the red dot and magnifier is better because of that unlimited eye relief, because of the ability to use it faster from awkward positions. In particular with 2GACM and brutality style stages where we emphasize move, shoot, where you have to reacquire the sight picture multiple times, the red dot becomes much more of a speed advantage, particularly with some of the props and obstacles and trenches and stuff we shoot through, than an LPVO.
So to put this into context, if you are doing something dynamic, let's also talk real world here too. So if you're doing something that is real world and it's goes between CQB and distance, like heck, an honest example of this would be what we saw in Afghanistan for our troops, right? They would necessarily be out in the field in mountain ranges that had long distance, but then they might be in a village that was like 5 yards, something like that. The red dot sight without the magnifier is the fastest, quickest thing to acquire. But if you're going to be in a position like Overwatch, where you have the ability to stand, you're static, and you're going to just control this field, whether it's real world or at a competition, is that where the LPVO kind of starts to shine?
Yeah, so for me, the LPVO is more of a benefit when most of the shooting is going to be past 100 yards on smaller targets, in particular if we're shooting targets out to like 500 yards. where the red dot and the magnifier is more of the 0 to 300 to maybe 400. Yes, I can use it farther, but it's ideal within that 0 to 300 and on more practical size targets, where the LPVO is more my choice when it's going to be 100 to 500 yards on smaller targets, and the courses of fire tend to be more get behind the optic, stay behind the optic, not a lot of reacquiring of the optic.
See, the challenge with that, though, is when we talk about this from a competition perspective and then bring it to the real world, is while you might have an idea of what a match is going to present to you in terms of targets, you're not going to have that option in the real world.
I think there's some ways you can ascertain that based on the environment you're operating in. So, for example, at our woodland brutality match, in general, in that area of the country, we found that the red dot divisions were more popular and people were using red dot and magnifiers more commonly at that match. Whereas at our high desert match, which is open terrain, further engagements possible, people preferred LPVOs more given the environment they were living in. So I think there's some of this is people are making these choices based on their perceived use on the environment they're living in and operating in. And legitimately, like in the woods of West Virginia, you can't see as far in a lot of places as you can in the high desert of Idaho.
A 100-yard shot or 100-yard, just the distance of 100 yards without something in the way is like unlikely.
Right. There's so much trees and brush, etc., that you're just not going to see that far.
But here, right here on this camera we're looking at here in the desert, you look behind us, you can see well past 1,000 yards right behind my back.
Right. I mean,
Okay.
When we shoot in Idaho, you can see further than any gun at the match can even realistically hit.
Sure, absolutely. So that's the challenge, though. So for like a competitive shooter such as yourself and myself too, we tend to have a couple rifles that are configured for specific purposes. But not everyone's going to do that and can do that or wants to do that. So the challenge of this conversation, I think, to bring it into scope, is if you're going to have your one go-to thing, that's where we should try to figure. I'd love to answer in this. I don't think there's a right answer or a wrong one, really. But like, if you're going to have one go-to thing, the plus and minus of both.
So for most people, I think the red dot and magnifier is going to be the most general purpose solution. It's going to allow them to shoot faster with less hassle, and there's a few things that go into that too. So like, you can't use a really cheap red dot with a cheap magnifier and expect the same outcome.
It's true.
There's some magnifiers that they're like looking through a dirty fish tank, and actually like trying to use it was worse than shooting without it for me.
Fair.
So like the EOTech you have is good. I really like the SIG Juliet.
Well, that's an LP1 actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like the SIG 4-power magnifier. The Juliet 4. It's very clear. It's 4-power. A lot of magnifiers are 3-power. So it has a little bit shorter eye relief, but it gives me a little bit more magnification. I think the trade-off's worth it. And you know, not all red dots are great under magnification. Some look horrendous under magnification from the same manufacturer. So like the Promethean you have on this gun looks good under magnification. The dot is concentric and crisp.
Nice and clear and crisp, and the magnifier just continues to be nice, clear, and crisp.
Right.
Yeah.
Where some red dots, particularly older ones that were made before magnifiers became as common, like earlier aim points even, look horrible under magnification because designing them to be magnified wasn't part of the design consideration.
Yeah, when you look through them without magnification, they look fine.
Right.
But then you flip it over and you've magnified all the defects that red dot happens to have.
It looks like it would for someone with an astigmatism uncorrected sometimes, where it's like a slash or it's starburst out really bad. It's not a concentric dot. So a lot of the good modern red dots look pretty good under magnification, but you start going to the cheaper, like under $150 ones, they look progressively worse. So a lot of the Holosuns today look good under magnification with their magnifiers. Even the mid-tier SIG red optics that aren't part of their like made in the USA or assembled in the USA line look reasonably okay under magnification. And unfortunately, like I can't give you a list of this stuff. You're just going to want to take a look at it and play with it if you can.
other thing to think about from that real world perspective is that magnification is good for a couple things. Engaging small targets close up that you couldn't see relatively well without some sort of magnification, but
Right.
also being able to see and identify targets further away than you could with the naked eye.
Right.
When you go with a magnifier behind a red dot, you're fixed to whatever the magnifier is.
Right.
4 or 3. The LPVO, you might go all the way up to what, 10 on a lot of these.
Yeah, some of them are now, like, we started off at 1 to 4, then it was 1 to 6, 1 to 8, 1 to 10. From a shooting perspective, tracking target to target, particularly moving targets, I've never gone above 6 power. When I go above 6 power and I've experimented with it, finding the next target or observing the whole area becomes much more difficult. You get very tunnel vision in on that little part of the environment you're looking at.
So the people that aren't familiar with that, as you increase the magnification, the field of view, which is the degrees of angle, gets smaller. So as it makes sense, right? You're making this bigger, but what you're doing is focusing in on a tighter area of the downrange area. So as you go to 10x, your field of view is quite small, and therefore your situational awareness, meaning perception of what's going on around whatever you can't see except directly through the scope, is probably lost.
Right. So to that end, the point of that being is that if you go above 6 power, it's more useful for observation than for actual shooting most of the time. Like, I'm at 6 power, I see something is there, but I can't quite tell what it is exactly, so I dial up more to see specifically what it is. In fact, I actually used my 1 to 10 on 10 power at one of our matches, because we didn't have all our spotting scopes set up yet during the staff match to observe impacts on targets for other shooters.
But you wouldn't have been shooting that way.
No. When I shot the stage, I was on 5 power for the same stage.
Yeah, it's funny when you go back to like World War II and then beyond, and even the original, like now, famous ACOG, 4X was the sweet spot.
Right. So I think this is another point to address. Like, there's 2 fundamental types of LPVOs, of second focal plane versus first focal plane.
Okay.
And the easy way to understand that is second focal plane, the reticle stays the same size regardless of magnification level. And first or front focal plane, the reticle scales with the magnification. So your
The crosshair gets bigger.
Yes.
Along with whatever you're looking at.
Right. So going above 6 power in your LPVO, I think it's more important for it to be front focal plane, so that your reticle scales with it. With 6 power and less, most of the shooting we're doing, out to 300 or 400 yards, you can hold over even if your BDC isn't perfect for the particular magnification.
So here's where you go back to 101. People are like, "What's that?" BDC, bullet drop compensator, or even range estimator.
Right.
You can use your reticle, that's beyond the scope of this video, but depending on your optic, you can use your reticle to judge the distance to a known size target. And if your reticle increases in size with magnification as you increase magnification, that means the reticle and the BDC or the range estimator stays the same regardless of what magnification you're at.
Right.
But if it doesn't, that means your reticle, your BDC or your range estimation reticle only works at a specific magnification.
Which is usually the highest.
10.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with a 1 to 6, if it only works on 6 power, it's fine. If it's a 1 to 10, that's 6x and higher. It's better to have the reticle scale with the magnification, in my opinion, because then you're going to have a much more usable range of magnification to do everything you want to do.
Now, on that note, and I know we're kind of going through the whole thing here, but that's the whole point of this 101. I would argue, even though I'm actually, and we're going to get to this, I prefer a red dot plus magnifier for me. However, I will concede you can do more precision aiming and shooting with an LPVO depending on your reticle.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I prefer them for events where I'm doing more shooting at distance at smaller targets. Another thing to consider why you might pick an LPVO over red dot magnifiers, if you inherently have some sort of vision limitation.
Okay.
If you have an astigmatism, a red dot may not work well for you. The reticle may not look clear enough under any magnification to make the hits you want to make at distance. So the LPVO has an etched reticle. Even if it does have illumination, the etched reticle can be focused to work with your eye in your prescription optimally that you might not be able to do with a red dot.
To those that don't know what that means, what we're talking about here is there's a piece of glass somewhere in this LPVO that has the sighting system, the reticle. It's literally baked into the glass. When you say etched, it's etched into the glass. And so therefore it can be much more precise. You could have thin as like hair fiber type reticle in an LPVO.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how good your red dot is going to be and how small the dot is, in fact, I kind of like bigger dots, the reality is it's not going to be that crisp. And when you magnify it, that dot only gets bigger, and it may actually be bigger than, or it could actually obscure what you're trying to aim at.
Yeah, red dots are probably the number one thing that diagnose people as having astigmatisms that they otherwise wouldn't have known that they had.
Yeah, they bring it up, and instead of a dot, it's this like starburst thing with lines and stuff.
Another potential benefit of the LPVO is if your prescription is small enough in deviation from normal, you can adjust the focus of the LPVO to be your prescription in the event your glasses are damaged or lost.
Well, now you can do that with your magnifier as well if you have a decent one.
Correct.
Yeah.
But depending on your vision, without the magnifier in place, you don't have that 1x capability. Like the red dot may be a complete blur.
Fair.
So for example, like for me with an EOTech, without my corrective lenses on, it's just a red cloud. Like it is unusable for me without my corrective lenses.
Well, you could hit a reasonably sized target regardless of that, but you're going to not have a lot of precision, right?
Well, it's a 65 MOA cloud, man.
It's big.
It's big.
Yeah.
So with the LPVO, I can focus it to be pretty close to my prescription and operate without my corrective lenses if I had to.
Fair enough. Now, your setup here has a side-mounted offset 45 degree, I believe it is, red dot sight, as well as an LPVO. But your LPVO is what, 1 to 6?
1 to 6, yeah.
So we saw a lot of this, and I think it's a very reasonable question for someone that hasn't done this. Why would you have a 1x LPVO with a 0? I'm going to use the word 0x because a red dot has no magnification. You're just looking through a piece of glass. Why would you have a 0x red dot with a 1x LPVO? Why wouldn't you just use the 1x LPVO and not bother with a red dot?
It depends on the circumstances you're in. So if I am immediately going from shooting far to close, it's faster to rotate my shoulder than break my mount on the gun, crank the optic back down, then get back on the optic. So it's there for when you're shooting at stuff far enough that you're not having the LPVO on 1 power. It's always best to shoot through your primary optic on 1x if possible, and the offset red dot is for extremely close, very fast transitions between close and far, and like particularly like imagine like, do I want to take a hostage rescue shot at 15 to 25 yards with the offset red dot, or do I want to do it with my primary optic on 1x? I want to do it with the primary optic on 1x because I'm more familiar consistently with the holdovers at range across the board with the primary optic, and it's more controllable with it mounted directly, 90 degrees up versus canted 45 degrees to the side.
I think another way to talk about this as a real world example would be you have your LPVO and you are engaging, I don't know, it's a war zone, and you're at 5x because you're engaging targets at 500 yards. But little did you know, something snuck up on you, and there's something else 20 yards away.
Right.
Do you have to break your shoulder mount and then turn this? Do you try to aim with the 5x setting you already have to deal with whatever just happened? Or do you just camp the gun or lift your head and boom, there's a red dot?
Right. Now, I zero both optics at the same distance, so if I had to, I can use it as an emergency in the event that the primary optic's damaged or occluded with debris, like you take a dive and it gets filled with mud or something like that. For whatever reason, I can shoot reasonably well with it out to 200.
It's like a modern version of having backup irons. You've got a backup red dot.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and generally speaking, the people competing with them in the same action space I am, like the guy who just won the IPSC Rifle World Shoot, he's doing the same thing. He has a 1 to 6 with a 45 degree offset red dot. And what they'll tell you, and most of the guys at the top will tell you, is like you want to shoot through your primary optic whenever possible. The offset red dot is for emergency or planned alternative use based on your stage plan.
So I think you've already answered this, but I know we're going to get the question anyway. Why not have the red dot with a 3x LPVO that goes up to 12 instead of 1x?
So some people are doing that. If more of the focus of the event is on smaller targets in general at further distances. So I have another rifle that I may use for high desert this year that has a 2 to 10 on the top and an offset red dot on the side. But much more of our match that we're shooting there is 100 plus yards, and more of it being at 300 to 500 yards. And we have bonuses to 7 to 900 yards potentially.
Yep.
That getting that bonus 700 yard shot, taking 60 seconds off your time, is a greater impact. So it really depends on what you're planning on doing with it. So I think if you live in a very open terrain area where you can see out to 700 or 800 yards, having that, upwards of 10 power magnification, and you start at a lower not at 1x, but you start at 2 or 3, so you have a wider range of usable magnification with wider fields of view and better light gathering capability with the optic that's set up for that application. It's something to consider, although like for most of what we do and for most people, I don't think that's like the primary choice.
Now, and then if we were to bring this back again to the real world, even though matches are the real world, but like serious use, if you're holding a position and scanning a field of fire, it's going to be much easier to do that with your primary optic that's like right here where you have your normal cheek weld and on your shoulder and just be looking through your LPVO than craning to look through a stacked optic or holding the gun sideways to sweep around with a red dot.
Right. So one negative to keep in mind with the 45 offset is if you're low to the ground, you're directing part of the ports of your muzzle device directly at the ground versus sideways. So you can potentially kick up a lot more debris next to you if you're trying to do that prone. It's really not convenient to do it most of the time.
Well, I don't use muzzle brakes, but still it applies to a flash hider as
yeah,
well.
so like that's why it's closed on the bottom, right? So
Mm-hmm.
do you want to orient your ports even with a flash hider towards the dirt? Not usually.
Your dust signature will be significant.
Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind of why it's better to shoot through the primary optic versus the offset.
So I think, did we address it all? I'm sure we didn't, but like, what else can you say to this? I think we kind of hit most of it.
I think we covered most of it. For most people in most circumstances, and you only have one gun. Let's say you only have one gun.
That's where I was going to go. Okay, you're going to have one gun. This is a gun you might use for competition, but you're literally going to have this as your emergency rifle for whatever could happen. Let's go there.
Red dot magnifier.
I agree.
Everything else beyond that is more specialized.
Yep. And that's where I'm at too. And it's why in 2017 we said red dot and magnifier. And still to this day, what would Stoner do or not? I still recommend for most people, for a general purpose rifle, red dot and magnifier.
Yeah, it's very hard to go wrong with. I think the only way to go wrong with it is if you have low quality red dot magnifier. And that can be a problem. But if you're buying reasonable quality red dot magnifier, I think that's easily the first choice. And if you're looking at other optics, it's for secondary rifles beyond your primary.
And when you go with the red dot and magnifier, here are the things you are giving up. You will have a limited level of magnification. Therefore, your ability to identify what you're looking at clearly will be probably 400 yards or in. Typically, it's 1x per 100 yards.
Right.
So you're limited to 400 yards. With 1 to 10, you're limited to 1,000 yards, but who the hell's shooting 5.56 at 1,000 yards anyway?
Oh, one thing we should address is magnifiers above 4 power, because
Yeah.
there are 5 and 6 power.
Oh, but the field of view gets so small.
The field of view gets really small. The eye relief gets really short. Like I had a SIG 6 power magnifier, and imagine like taking that LPVO, cutting it in half, and now that's your magnifier.
Yeah.
And it got really bulky and weird having this bigger thing hanging off the side of the gun. And I found it to not be very useful. The sweet spot is 3 to 4 power for the magnifier.
And that's what this one is, right?
So,
and that's what most of them are.
Yep.
So if you go with red dot and magnifier, you can identify things reasonably to 400 yards. And if you're dealing with something further than 400 yards, 5.56 becomes questionable anyway, except for ring and steel. Well, it can be done, but it's questionable, right?
Right.
And you have a less precise aiming reticle. But for anything you would use a general purpose rifle, such as this one in, it's probably not going to be at 400 anyway. It's probably not even going to be at 100. And then you have all the benefits of no eye relief issues, but still have the ability to magnify, as well as you can probably take the magnifier on or off if you want to reduce weight.
Right.
Right. Now, if you go LPVO only, you have increased your ability for observation at range, but you've kind of increased your difficulty on everything else.
Yeah, and people can get close to as fast using LPVOs, but particularly if you're dealing with situations that you haven't practiced or trained for, with like getting behind the LPVO, that can become very frustrating. And we see that with people trying to shoot through things like VTAC barricades, under and around cars, that kind of stuff.
Even at 1X.
Yeah.
When you turn that thing sideways and you're trying to get under, it's hard to find that sight picture.
It will slow you down quite a bit for those sorts of things.
And that was so. On that note, if for some reason you watch this and you were not convinced and you decided you're going to go LPVO, it's interesting in that, in my opinion, the quality of the optics performance at 1X is more important than its quality at 10X.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because when it's at 1X, you want to be able to use it pretty much both eyes open, and not have a lot of aberration or your brain like freaking out, because it's not they're not exactly 1X, they're like 1 point something, and your brain can deal with that. But if it's off or it's a bad image, it gets squirrely.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think we've covered this quite well. I'm sure some of the optics nerds might take issue with our generalizations, but this is a general 101 overview.
Yep. So we're going to do more 101s, right? Because we see these topics coming up, and I want to address and help bring education to an audience that may not be familiar with some of these topics. And your experience with competition shooting and all the years you've done it and everything you've done with every build known to man really brings a lot of that to the table. And while a lot of this is baked into the What Would Stoner Do project, well, those videos started in 2017. That's freaking, 8 years ago now.
Oh, if it's older than 2 weeks, no one sees it on YouTube.
No, it's gone forever. Doesn't exist. Hopefully you found this interesting and useful, and it'll help you make some educated decisions about what you would want to do with your general purpose rifle, whatever your use case is. And this is almost 30 minutes long because it's actually in-depth and thorough, which means YouTube will not promote this at all. And so therefore, maybe you can share, subscribe, all that. Show your friends if you think this is something that's useful for them, informationally speaking. And the only reason we can do this kind of thing that is not based on clicks or views on YouTube is because InRange is demonetized intentionally and is a viewer-supported project. You and others like you keep this channel alive via direct support. Done it for a decade. Thank you for doing it. If you already are one, appreciate you very much. If you can consider it, patreon.com/InRangeTV. Every dollar counts. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more 101 topics where we kind of give you, hopefully, the basics to get you going and as capable as you can be with whatever gear you decide to use.